the biggest screen I've ever presented in front of, by the way. This is very impressive. Thank you everyone for coming. I should point out right at the start, I'm not a vendor. I'm not here to sell you anything. I work for a company called CyberCX. We're the biggest cybersecurity company in Australia. I run the incident response team. And as you just heard, we respond to probably 400 or more breaches for our clients every day. We help clients figure out how to deal with these situations. I'm also an instructor with the SANS Institute. So really my job here is as an educator, as a trainer. I want to share some of the insights from all of the breaches that we do and help you to respond, to figure out how to deal with them if you were ever a victim. Now, I'm going to talk about ransomware. There's a lot of discussion about ransomware. We all know what it is. Most people know how it works. But there's a couple of parts of ransomware that aren't talked about all that often. So imagine you are running a company, you've just been encrypted, your factory's shut down, your systems don't work, your people can't operate. Right? And now you've got this problem where you've got a criminal who is starting to talk to you, saying, we need to talk so that we can solve this problem for you. And they're trying to get some money from you. And I'll just push forward to the next slide. This is a problem that affects companies all around the world, including in Indonesia. I saw this interesting report the other day saying that Indonesia experienced more ransomware in 2021 than any other Southeast Asian country. And this is similar across the world. So you've been breached, you've got a criminal who wants to talk to you, you've now got some really difficult decisions to make. And these are the things that people don't talk about when it comes to ransomware. Do I engage with this criminal? Do I start talking to them? What do you say? How do you say it? How do you deal with that situation? And the big question that everyone asks, should you pay a ransom? Now, when you ask people, should you pay a ransom, a lot of people will have a very simple response. They might say, no, you should never pay a ransom because you're dealing with a criminal and you're paying a criminal and that money will go to other criminal activity. Yes, it will. That's the way ransomware works. That's the way cybercrime works. But again, if you're an owner of a company and your company doesn't work anymore because you've had a ransomware attack, that's a very simplistic answer. That's not a very good answer. So at CyberCX, we decided that we wanted to share some insights into how to actually deal with that situation. And what I'm going to show you today is the methodology that we use in our company to help victims answer that question. How do you engage with an attacker? And should you ever pay a ransom? Now, before we talk about this, it's important to understand that a ransomware attack it's really two kinds of attacks that often happen at the same time. The first one is the attacker will break into your system and they will encrypt data. They'll encrypt systems. They'll stop your data being accessible. They'll stop your computers from working. And what the attacker is trying to do is create pressure upon you to pay them some money. Because again, they're just criminals. All they want is to get paid. So they hope that by encrypting your systems, they're causing maximum damage and you are forced to give them some money to get out of that problem. That's traditional ransomware. But there's a second kind of attack that happens at the same time in just about every ransomware case. And that's what we call data theft extortion. So while the attackers are inside your network, they'll look for sensitive data and they'll steal it. And then they will show you a sample of that data and say, look at what we've got. And we've got 300 gigabytes more. And if you don't pay us however many $1 million in 72 hours, we're going to publish that online. And you're going to have to deal with it. So again, two methods that the attackers are using to put pressure on you to make you pay them. They happen together in just about every ransomware case, but they're very different threats. They're very different risks. So understanding the difference is really important in figuring out how to respond. Let me give you an interesting example of attackers creating pressure. One of the ransomware groups that we deal with occasionally is called Alpha V or Black Cat. They're a reasonably new group. And they're quite aggressive in how they operate. One of the things that Black Cat did quite recently, and I mean maybe in the last 4 weeks, is they actually got all of the stolen data from their victims, and attackers usually publish it online. You can go and you can download gigabytes of data. But they decided they would make it even easier for anyone to access. So they built this web portal and they catalogued all of their stolen data. And you can get on the dark web and you can visit this site and you can see their victims and you can search through the data that they've stolen through these companies and download what you want. So think about that. If you're the company who is on their site, think about the pressure that creates on you to take this data down. How do you take this data down? You pay the criminals. Which gets us to the big question, should you ever pay a ransom? Now, we are often asked, how much money are we talking about here? What kind of money is being asked for? This shows the range of the initial demands from cases that we've done at CyberCX. So at the smaller end, a ransom demand might be as little as $7,000. At the upper end, the biggest we've done, which happened last year, the initial demand was $50 million. Now you can negotiate if you have to. Sometimes you can reduce it a lot, sometimes a little bit. Depends on the people that you're dealing with. But there's a wide range of money that's involved. So, your company's been compromised, your data's encrypted, your data is stolen. The attacker might be doing other things as well, like launching denial of service against your website. We had cases recently where the attackers were telephoning the executives in the company on their mobile phones, yelling at them, saying, you need to talk to us. Right? Again, they're trying to create pressure. Now you have this problem. Do you talk to the criminals? Most ransomware cases that we deal with involve engaging with the attackers. Doesn't mean you have to pay, but you engage with them, you talk to them. And it's important when you do this that you understand why you're doing it and how you do it. What are your objectives and what strategies you're going to use. There's three main reasons why you talk to a cyber criminal. One, you try to influence their behavior. You try to say, stop launching your denial of service on the website, stop talking to our executives, stop threatening to do things, let's talk. Now, it doesn't mean you're going to control what they do. They're criminals. We always say to our clients, there is no guarantees. You are dealing with criminals. But you can at least try to influence them. If they feel that they're engaged in a conversation that could get to their outcome, you might be able to influence what they do. The second objective is to gather intelligence, gather information. Now, in most cases, the key bit of information that you want to know from a criminal is, what did you steal? We can use forensic techniques to reconstruct the attack. We can try to see what they took. But the person that knows the best what was stolen is actually the criminal that stole it. So you try to get that information. The third reason you talk to a criminal is to negotiate payment, if you want to do that. Now, you don't need to do all of those things. We've done a lot of cases where our clients have said, we're never going to pay. But we still need to engage with them because we try to influence them and we try to get that information, usually about what they stole. Doesn't mean you're going to pay them, it just means you're going to talk. In terms of the strategies, this is going to sound strange because some of the cybercrime groups will say this to you themselves. Don't take it personally. It's just business. And it is just business for them. And that's very important because you need to think about how you talk to them, you need to think about what you say, you need to understand what they're saying back. Use professional help. In the real world, if someone is kidnapped, you don't leave it to the family to negotiate with the kidnapper. You get professionals, you get experts, people who understand how this works, people who have intelligence about the criminals that you're dealing with. And that leads to the third strategy, make sure that you make intelligence-informed decisions. A lot of these ransomware groups, we know them, we know how they operate, we have intelligence about them. We use that information to help us make good decisions through the process. Again, there's no guarantees, but you can make informed decisions. So, the million-dollar question, the multi-million-dollar question, should you ever pay a ransom? Now, I would love to say, no, don't ever pay. I used to work in the police, so as a former member of the police, it's difficult to say this, but there are situations where companies are under so much pressure and the risk, the impact of the attack is so significant that they end up paying. And before we go through this, I'm going to make it very clear, paying a criminal is always a last resort. It should only ever be done after you've tried every other possibility and you are absolutely without a choice. There's consequences of that. But the question is, how do you make that choice? How do you go through the decisions to determine what the right choice is? And that's what I'm going to walk you through now. Now, some of you might want to take photos. At the end of this, I'm going to show you a link to a guide that we have on the CyberCX website where you can download a book that we wrote, which is a best practice guide to ransomware and extortion. And all this information is contained there. So, remember we talked about there's two kinds of problems here. There's ransom, so where your data is encrypted, and there's the data theft. And we're going to look at how the decisions work on both sides. The first question we often ask is, and this is talking about ransomware, encrypted systems, the first question we ask, is there an immediate risk to life or health or safety? Imagine if you work in an environment where human lives are at risk because systems don't work. This doesn't happen often, thankfully, but you can imagine it. Healthcare, aircraft, major machinery, other places where there might be a risk to life. There are cases where that is so significant that a payment is done quite quickly. The second question we ask, I'll flip through these as we go. Are there alternative ways to recover encrypted data? Now, ideally, you'll have some backups, but good attackers will blow away your backups. So you might not have your backups available. You might use forensic techniques to try to recover the data, which is possible in some cases, particularly if the attacker hasn't done a very thorough job of encrypting the systems. You might rebuild the systems from scratch. You might collect the data from other places. But you have to look at, are there other ways that we can get this data back instead of paying? The next question we often ask is, what's the impact if we can't get the data back? At the start of a ransom case, most companies think, oh, that's it, the data's gone, we can't operate anymore. But then over the next few days or weeks, they start saying, you know what, we can actually keep operating. It's not going to be fun, it's not going to be pretty, but we can still keep going without getting that data back. And they make that decision instead of making the decision to pay. So sometimes it takes time. Now, attackers know this, which is why often an attacker will try to exert pressure on you straight after they've encrypted your systems, because they know that psychologically that's the time when you're thinking the worst. And then the longer after days or weeks you start thinking, you know what, we can get around this, we can overcome it in other ways. That's why attackers like to put timers on their payments, try to put pressure on you at the start. You need to think of the other impacts as well. There might be lost revenue, there might be legal impacts, there might be impacts on your customers, and you need to work through each of those and think about how can we reduce that impact as much as possible. Because what you're trying to do is, here's the risk of the initial impact of the breach, you're trying to drop that down to the point where you say, we've managed the risk, we've managed the impact, we don't need to think about paying anymore. And the fourth question is, what are the risks if we do pay? Paying a ransom has risks. You might not get your data back. The decryptor might not work. There's reputational considerations. What happens if you are identified as a company that paid a criminal? Right? There might be legal issues. There might be contractual risks. You need to work through these and again, think of how you can mitigate, think of how you can deal with all those risks. And then you'll get to a point where you say, all right, here's all the risks, here's all the things we've done to reduce them as much as possible. Where do we get to at the end of the day? Have we reduced them down enough that we can deal with it? Or are the risks still so significant that we need to think about paying? That's how you work through that one. Now, the second one is data theft. Your data's been stolen. Again, similar concept, but different kinds of questions. Is the potential impact of the stolen data significant? This is why we have to find out, what did they steal? It's often a top priority at the start of a ransomware case to know what did they take. Because if you know what they took, you can assess the risk of that and you can start managing the risk. And it might be personal information, it might be research and development, it might be internal data from your company that is sensitive to you, it might be information that has to do with your customers or your business partners or other people. All of those categories of data have different risks, but all of them can be mitigated as well. Then you look at how do you mitigate it. So for example, we did a case a while ago where sensitive data was stolen about physical security. So this organisation ran security for buildings in the real world. It was things like where the CCTV cameras are located, what the security codes are on the alarm, who the people are on the incident response list. So we actually got our penetration testing teams involved and we gave them that data and we said, if you were a criminal and you had this, what could you do? What kind of attacks could you do? And then we worked through them one by one and made sure the security was in place so that those attacks couldn't be done anymore. So you can deal with these risks. And the last two are the same as the previous slide. Now, people often ask, okay, what happens if you pay? What can you expect? Can you trust these people to keep their word? They're criminals, like we keep saying. So, again, I've got two slides, one for ransomware, one for data theft. If you pay, you should get a decryption program. Notice I've said you should. You won't always. There are some cases we've dealt with where the encryptor wasn't received, or to the second point, the encryptor didn't work. We did a case recently where the encryption method that the attacker used was very complicated. It shredded the disk in random sections so that it could do it really quickly. But it was such a complex encryption pattern that the decryptor couldn't actually decrypt it. So the company ended up paying the attacker some money, but the data wasn't recoverable, which was a terrible situation. You should get details of how the attacker could. Attackers will say, we will tell you how we did it so you can fix your security. They always lie, right? They will give you random information, or they might not even know how it occurred because someone else was actually the person that broke into the network and then gave them the access. So don't believe that. The other concern is the cryptocurrency payments. If you do make a cryptocurrency payment, it is not anonymous. People monitor attackers' Bitcoin accounts, Monero accounts. These things can be traced. So don't think that if your company makes a payment, it will stay anonymous. It won't. If you don't pay, you will likely not get a decryptor. There are very few situations where an attacker will give you a decryptor if you don't pay them some money. However, there is a chance that at some point in the future, a decryptor will become available. So hold on to your encrypted data because you might be able to decrypt it sometime later on. Now finally, how does it work for data theft? So the attacker's stolen your sensitive data. If you do pay them, they should post your data online. They should not. But there are some situations where they might have already posted some of it and they can't take it back. They should delete your data, but this is probably the most contentious part of all of this because the attacker might send you screenshots or a video. Here's a video of me deleting your files. Do you believe them? Did they delete it? There are some criminal groups where I can tell you every time that they've been paid, the data has never come up again. We don't know if it's been deleted, but it's never been seen again. Right? But again, you're dealing with criminals. So these decisions involve risk. And on the other side, if you don't pay, you can expect them to post the data online. We've had cases where they don't, though. We've had situations where the company doesn't pay and the attacker just doesn't post it online. Maybe they're too busy, maybe they moved on to something else. We don't know, but they've still got the stolen data. And sometimes attackers will use that stolen data to then carry out other attacks. So again, this whole thing is about understanding the risks and then working through those risks one by one trying to minimize them as much as you can, and hopefully getting to a point where you've reduced the risk so much that that option of payment isn't something you need to do anymore. And that's how we do it. We do this many, many times for organizations, and this is a methodology that works. It's well proven. And as I said at the start, if you visit this URL, it'll actually take you to where we published the ransomware guide, and all of this material is available in there with a whole lot of other supporting details that you can read through. And that's pretty much time, so I'm going to finish up on that point. Thank you very much, everyone.